Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rachmawati Hidayah from Rombel Khusus 1. In this occasion, I would like to present to you a research article entitled Pidgin as Lingua Franca for Anglophone West African Countries by Mowarin, Macauley, Ph.D. and Tonukari Ufuoma Emmanuel from Delta State University. Okay, this PowerPoint presentation will be divided into subtopics, started from objectives, introduction, and then method. And then next we have urbanization and language in Anglophone West African countries. And then next we have the demerits of adopting either English or any indigenous language as the language of wider communication. And then West African Pidgins as a lingua franca for Anglophone West African countries. Next, we have advantages of West African Pidgin as the language for sub-regional integration in urban centers. And then the last one will be the conclusion of the research article. All right, let's start from the objective of this research. The objective of this research is to look into how inter-ethnic communication can be facilitated by the adoption of West African Pidgins as the lingua franca in Anglophone West African countries. Okay, the Anglophone West African countries are the countries such as Gambia, Liberia, Nigeria, and so on. And they are very diversity in the culture and language, so they need a lingua franca to communicate. Again, the introduction in this research talk about the Anglophone countries are the former colonies of Great Britain with complex multilingual and multicultural speech community which stands on a linguistic tripod. These linguistic tripods are the indigenous languages, English language, and West African Pidgin language. Here, in these countries, English is used either as a tool or instrument for official functions, but these countries are lack a language that plays the informative function of serving as a cohesive tool for interpersonal and social interaction at the informal medium of communication. So they lack of the language for the communication. And then next, in the introduction, they also talk about urbanization and sub-regional trade that has now made the need for a sub-regional lingua franca imperative. The method used in this research is a case study research analyzing the linguistics phenomenon in Anglophone West African countries. Okay, next topic is urbanization and language in Anglophone West African countries. In developing countries, urbanization can be defined as growth in urban areas caused by rural-urban drift. Stratton 1978 in Onwuka 2001 defines urbanization as a special concentration of people in cities through migration, natural increase and territorial expansion of urban areas as their boundaries are redefined or as rural areas become urbanized. In developing countries like Anglophone West African countries, rural-urban drift is on the ascent due to lack of development in the rural areas. So the people there are looking for more developed part in their countries. The effect of urbanization on the cities is twofold. They are the environmental and the linguistic effect. But today we will only talk about the linguistic effect. The linguistic effect of urbanization is that each of them has a complex multilingual and multicultural nature. This case happened in Lagos. Lagos is located in the southwest of Nigeria and Yoruba. One of the three national languages are spoken in this part of the countries. So in Lagos, they use English as the national language, and then for the wider community language, they use Yoruba language. But now, it's started to be changed by a Nigerian Pidgin that are mostly used by the migrants there. Okay, now the merits of adopting either English or any indigenous language as the language of wider communication. First one is West African Pidgins. It is adopted as the language of wider communication in Anglophone West African countries. It means there are factors that make it infeasible to encourage the adoption of either English or any of the indigenous language as the language of wider communication in these countries. And then the English language, Baba GD 2001, quoting Bose 1985, states that Nigerian elite are plagued by linguistic imperialism. Yet, English cannot be adopted in these countries because, like stated by Crystal 1987, as cited in Lamidi 2000, mention that there are different varieties of language that serve specific functions in the communities in which they are used. Variety is described as any form of a language which can be identified in a speech community. And then the school English, like in Bambose, still remains the predominant variety of English used on these countries. English is impracticable as the language of cross-cultural communication in urban centers in these countries is high level of illiteracy in English language by residents of urban centers. And the next is an indigenous language. An indigenous language that can function as a lingua franca in this subregion is Hausa. Lingua franca in the northern part of most countries in the West Coast. So in the West Coast, most of them are already use the Hausa language as their lingua franca. Indigenous language is impractical because the use of this language is due to the fact that speakers of other indigenous languages will not be favorably disposed to learning the language to avoid the feeling of oppression and domination by native speakers of the Hausa language. Next, we talk about the problems of adopting indigenous as a national language in African countries. Some of the problems are the construction of national integration. And then it is argued that indigenous languages cannot play a role in national integration because of their divisive potential. Ethnic tension and the proliferation of militant ethnic groups have for a long time made West African regional integration a mirage. Next, we talk about West African Pidgin as a lingua franca for Anglophone West African countries. West African Pidgin is a member of English-based Atlantic Creoles and Pidgin, so the base of this language is English actually. Holm in 1988 argues that West African Pidgin is restricted in West Africa. West African Pidgins are made up of three subvarieties. They are Creole that's spoken in Sierra Leone, Creole spoken in Liberia, and then West African Pidgin English or mutually intelligible, which also consists of three subgroups. They are Ghanaian Pidgin, Nigerian Pidgin, and Cameroonian Pidgin. West African Pidgin English ranges from rudimentary pidgins to Creole-like varieties. Nigerian Pidgin is in favor to the adoption because Nigerian Pidgin has more speakers. The main objective of the adoption is the adoption of a language for primary means of communication, so it is essential to standardize the orthography. The social prejudice against Nigerian Pidgin as the language of the illiterate and semi-literate is diminishing since it is now being used between the educated in informal settings, especially in the Niger Delta region. It is also a language of advertising and the language of political campaign by both gubernatorial and presidential aspirants. Next is the advantages of West African Pidgin as the language for sub-regional integration in urban centers. So the advantages are the language would enhance sub-regional integration. It will also enhance commercial activities across the sub-region. And then this language is ideal as means of oral communication because the language needed for sub-regional integration in the urban centers is one to be used mainly for oral communication. The last one is the conclusion. Okay, the paper believes that if eventually this variety of West African Pidgins is sufficiently developed with a standard vocabulary and orthography, it will be to the West African sub-region what Swahili is to the East African sub-region used. Okay, that's all my presentation today. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.